Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, just to let everybody know, the conference will be in dual language. It will be in Portuguese and in English. So if you need a translation headset, please collect it from outside the door now, because there will be presentations in Portuguese and English, and you have the opportunity to ask the questions in Portuguese and English as well. So welcome to Automotive Logistics South America 2014. It's great to be back in Sao Paulo. It's particularly good for me to be back in Sao Paulo because I wasn't here last year. So I missed a great conference, but apparently it seemed to go a bit too well. I don't think I was even missed, so I had to make sure I was here this time so you don't forget who I am. And for those of you who have forgotten who I am, my name's Louis Yakumi. I'm the publisher of the Automotive Logistics Group. We publish magazines, Automotive Logistics Magazine, Finished Vehicle Logistics Magazine. We organize conferences all around the world, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, China, Brazil, Russia, etc. We have Automotive Logistics Weekly Newsletter, which is also published or sent out in Portuguese. And we have many articles online which are not even in the publication, so please look at our websites as well. The theme for the conference this year is Making the Connections, and this has so many meanings. For Automotive Logistics South America, it's all about making the connections, whether it's from car maker to suppliers, connecting South America to the rest of the world, connecting different logistics modes and making logistics out here truly multimodal, and very importantly, connecting the people as well. Some of the people you should definitely connect with are our sponsors. Our premier sponsor, TNT, who are hosting the dinner this evening. Our gold sponsors, Jeffco, who are hosting the coffee breaks, and Syncreon, who are hosting the lunches. Our global sponsor, Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics, who are known as our global sponsor because they sponsor all of our conferences around the world. And our silver sponsor, BLG Logistics, who are known locally as BMS Logistica. They sponsor this conference because they have services, products, knowledge for this specific sector, for this specific market. So please visit their stands, read their literature, and meet their people. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at what you can find out and how they can help you in your business. But most importantly, like all conferences, it's about connecting with each other. This is a meeting place, not a school lesson. We have some great presentations, but you are all participants, so it's not about just sitting back and listening to the presentations. It's about asking questions, making comments, agreeing and disagreeing with the speakers, and to be open to talk and share ideas in the networking breaks, in the coffee, the lunch, and the dinners tonight. This is, after all, your conference. The automotive industry is very important for South America. And as we know, logistics is very important for the South America, for the automotive industry. So make sure you're an active part in the future of your industry by taking part in everything during the day. And hopefully, we can enjoy a little bit of the conference too. So now we go on to the kind of important bit, the presentations. We have some great presentations lined up for you. From, I suppose, an analyst with the numbers, sort of a vehicle maker, but perhaps today representing ANFAVEA, the association, and on the end, a logistics company giving us their view of how the industry, the automotive industry, maybe will develop. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome the first speaker of the day, Ricardo Pazzianotto, partner and automotive lead for Brazil from PwC. Thank you, Ricardo.
Bom dia, obrigado. Meu nome é Ricardo Pazzianotto, eu sou sócio da PwC no Brasil. Não por coincidência, eu sou um dos responsáveis pela área de operações da PwC, que cuida da parte também de logística, infraestrutura.
Logistics, infrastructure, transformation in plant, all the productive process, and I am the leader of the automotive area. My conference today, people asked me to make an overview of what is going on in the global movements of production markets, where this production is going to, what countries will do, and in the end to show how this impacts in Brazil, to provide you a panorama so that you may understand, debate, discuss how logistics may help or impair or be influenced by these movements. Well, my objective today is to address the situation of global production. We will address the regions in some countries, and in the end we'll see South America and Brazil. We'll deeply analyze Brazil and some countries that may impact in some global decisions of what will be produced in Brazil due to the local markets. The main points we have to observe in this analysis are they go on the recovery of emerging markets such as US and the European Union. We see these two regions growing, some of them more than some regions of the developing markets. We'll analyze investments that are being taken to countries that were not in our radar as producers of automotive vehicles, with the objective of meeting the needs in the domestic market in an attempt to protect the domestic markets, in an attempt to serve the region where they are or export to other regions. And the situation in South America, flow of investments in the long and medium term in Brazil. Here we can see the regional growth as a projection between 2013 and 20. The first chart, the first figure you have there, North America, you see 13.6% growth up to 2020. This is due basically to a greater offer of credit, cheaper credit in the US, the interest rate, lower interest rate, the price of gas also, and with a trend and a natural revision or renewal of this fleet around 12 years. This promotes this renewal of this fleet because to have a new car under those conditions is cheaper than to acquire a used car due to maintenance, guarantee, working. So if we see a growth of 13%. I will also address the issues in the US, Mexico and Canada. We have interesting movements in the countries. South America with a more constrained growth, around 2 million between 2013 and 20. I'll show you the figures later on. The greatest part of all this is Brazil. We have some local production in Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, but most of it and the growth, mainly the growth is in Brazil. The European Union showing growth, strong growth around 11% up to 2020, and much of this is due to the base market on the crisis of 2008 is still and showing uh, an acceleration now starting and up to 2020. The European East, 5.4% growth, but only 1.5 million units up 2020. And Africa and East, a growth of 4 million vehicles, adding 4 million vehicles in this production. And Asian Pacific, here we have two cases. We have the developing Asia, where most of the growth comes from China. We see a growth of more than 16 million up to 2020, representing a growth of 61%. And Asia, the developed Asia, basically Japan and Korea, with a decrease in the production of 3% or 830,000 vehicles. We'll try to understand why these figures are here. Here we show you the 10 top and the 10 least, so to speak. China, with this vertiginous growth, the number we see here is the contribution to growth. It will be added 11 million units by China. US and India around 2.4, 2.5 million. And here some interesting figures. Mexico adding more than Brazil in terms of capacity up to 2020, 1.7 million against 1.5 Brazil. In 2020, we'll see Mexico will surpass Brazil in terms of production. It will be the 7th greatest producer of vehicles. And some countries that were not in the radar some years ago, such as Thailand, Iran, Spain, Russia, and Indonesia, are coming now, trying to serve their markets, rendering services to their neighbors, trying to find an alternative to avoid imports in some cases. And those that really lose up to 2020 are Canada. We have 2 or 3 reasons to mention here that are common to these countries. Canada, whose production main to the cost of hand labor with the American market and the Mexican market, there's more advantage to bring from these countries. Japan, that comes from tsunami event exporting to their markets. Brazil receives most of this production. United States, most of the production, avoiding the concentration of production and the high risk in case an accident of this nature may come in the future. Australia, the information we have, is that it will close production of the greatest plants up to 2017 because of logistics and costs of parts and hand labor. Belgium, Austria, South Korea has 2 reasons here. It's a very low number, but may mean a trend to the issue of the fights or the struggles between North and South Korea influencing investments. And there is a trend that Japan has today. South Korea exports half of its production, and it is the idea to take production to their importer markets. And the cost of hand labor is rising in South Korea. Then we have Romania, Finland, Portugal, other decreases that we see here. As I said, just to illustrate, Brazil is still in the fourth greatest market, ahead of Germany. That's a stable country in terms of market. It shouldn't grow more than what we see here. And in terms of production, today Brazil is the seventh greatest producer, but in 2020 we should lose this position to Mexico. There are some reasons for this. Mexico has the American market at their disposal, and the cost of hand labor is more attractive than ours. Internal affairs, such as the cost of production, is more competitive, and the bilateral agreements Mexico's been doing, opening the market to countries through free trade agreements. This is the Mexican example. We have enormous global plants installed in Mexico, all over Mexico, in a total of 2.8 million units, and an addition of capacity of 2020, increasing this capacity, the installed capacity, to 5.1 million vehicles and a production of the 4.5. We see BMW with an expressive plant, 150,000 vehicles. Nissan in Aguascalientes is the plant with more than 300,000 units. Toyota, and this is a plant from Audi for 150,000 vehicles, a plant inside Volkswagen. So Audi comes here as an important competitor of Brazil in the next years to the international market. Now, talking about Brazil, some questions that make us think about our installed capacity, investments, production due to expected sales. We have the issue of re-election, what will be the reforms to improve competitiveness, and the Brazil costs, Venezuela and Argentina, that somehow impacts our export market, because Argentina represents most of our exported products, and some issues related to the forecast that we will see. As I said, this is the panorama of sales in South America, where Brazil is this bar here, represents the sales in the region, a small decrease here. Argentina, a little bit less, a decrease, and Venezuela disappearing of this scenario of sales in South America. Let us detail Brazil. We have annual sales dropping or decreasing in 2014. We had a small decrease in 2013. It will be greater in 2014. As to license of new vehicles, and our scenario to the production of light vehicles up to 2020. Here we have three information in the same chart. The volume, excess of capacity. Volume is production, excess of capacity, and the use of this capacity. In 2015, our projection to use this capacity did not reach 65%, although all the investment done, announced, and done up to that moment, or up to 2020, as to the automotive policy, we will see a low use of this capacity and some projects will be ready, but we have an add in the automotive capacity in 2015 and up to 2016, making this capacity increase in our internal sales, and not being such a success and keeping low the use of these already built plants or that will be built. Here are the economic indicators we use in our projections for the sake of sales, planning of production, low GDP, mainly in the next year. We have some low projections, inflation rate, growing population, and unemployment. The Inovar Auto program has reverted the ascending of exports and could block the drop in exports in not a clear rhythm pace, not a clear pace. We had a growth up 2011, then we had a drop again, and there is a trend that exports will grow again, but we have issues to be solved in Brazil to maintain, to improve competitiveness of our products so that we can be competitive in the international market. This is the Mexican example, just to show that Mexico is inserting this market, and as opposite as China that has 20 million cars, Mexico has bilateral agreements, quality, upper quality products, and is an important competitor. We have to see Mexico as a competitor in the international market, not so much in the domestic market. Investments as to Inovar Auto, installed capacity, expansion of capacity of the existing plants, new plants, and investments in research and development. This is our forecast. Up to 2020, we should reach a production of 4.5 million vehicles up to 2020, with 23 brands in the national market. South America, again, here if we follow the process of investment from Inovar Auto, investments that had already done, these are from logistics, and Brazil may attract the parts may increase the capacity in producing parts for several reasons: the issue of strategic sales and IPI, the taxes, the cost of bringing these parts from abroad. So we see some developments in the short-term basis rather than the important set that the car industry may do to improve its local content, to the effect of presumed credit of Inovar Auto and the cost of moving this product from some part in the world to be produced and assembled in Brazil. We have to follow the first movements of plant expansion and growth in production. So we have, on a short-term basis, the scenario is not certain. We need some structural changes, remodeling, so that Brazil may compete, so we improve local conditions and exports conditions, hand labor, logistics that you see here during the day, tax issues, so that we can return to growth mainly sales, and face other important markets that will compete with other countries.
As I said, and the long-term growth. I brought some information. My time's almost over. In regards to Venezuela, Venezuela also with the production, as we all know, that's very small. Install capacity, it's very small, very low use, below 10% in this year, next year, and also Argentina with a small increase in the install capacity. The uses are also still very low, running the risk of promoting a policy for attracting investments without having a domestic market prepared for that production. Well, that's what I had to say. Thank you very much. I think that questions will be asked later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for giving us a great introduction to global automotive industry and then a special focus on South America. So it's not bad news. It isn't particularly good news. I suppose you've seen, worse ups and downs in Brazil and in South America. So I suppose that, slight constance can be a good thing as well and helps you to develop the logistics and supply chain as it needs to develop. Next up, our good friend Gustavo Bonini, who's the head of inbound logistics for Scania, but kind of in this particular instance representing ANFAVEA and their logistics committee. Gustavo.
Bom dia.
My name is Gustavo Bonini. I'm responsible for inbound logistics of Scania, and I'm also the coordinator of the ANFAVEA Commission of Logistics. I'm just going to carry out this presentation for them, on behalf of them. Last year, the theme was cost logistics and how to live with the Brazil cost. And I think it's very relevant, today's theme, the theme of today's presentation, which is making connections, because I think it complements to resolve the difficulties of infrastructure that we have in the country. And it's not going to be a resolution of short term. We have short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. And the short-term ones are very addressed to connecting the different players and different associations, which is what we're going to be presenting here today, to be able to face these difficulties, especially of infrastructure. I brought some slides of last year's presentation for the sake of comparison of what progressed and what didn't, and why it didn't progress. So just showing you the industry map. We're talking about 30 manufacturers. If we saw this map like 20, 30 years ago, we had a different picture, concentration in the southeast, but now it's spreading all over Brazil, which is also a higher logistics challenge to put together all these manufacturers which are in different places to serve the whole market. We have here the Brazilian automobile industry that represents 1/5 of the Brazilian GDP, with the invoicing of 16 million, 15 million employments, and the capacity for 5 million vehicles, and over 100 farming machines. We have 30 manufacturers, the auto parts 500, 61 plants in 10 states and 46 municipalities. The parts of investments from 94 to 2012, and here, as shown in the past presentation, is the 4th world market, but it's the 7th world producer. Well, so naturally, this is where This is an importing market. We'll see in our figures that it hasn't been like that along the year, but this is becoming more and more relevant. So today we have a deficit comparing what we exported in 2013 to what we imported in 2013. Also, another piece of information that's quite interesting, like I said at the beginning, the decentralization of the producing centers. If we follow, the south region went from 14.8% of the total production of the country to 22.2%, the northeast region from 3.2 to 6.2. Here we see a small percentage, but in growth it's quite significant. And obviously, this followed the trend of growth in these markets in the north and northeast. Well, northeast went from 13 to 15, and the north region from 3 to 5. So here talking about internal market, domestic market, we see the development from 2002 to 2013 with a growth of 2.5 times of the market. It's a quite expressive figure, but we also see how much is imported in the share of imported vehicles, going from less than 10% and now close to 20%. Whilst production grew a little less, 127% from 2002 to 2013, going from 1.600 million to 3,600, and the results what we see here, it's this change. When we were a market that we had a lot of exports arriving at our peak at 2005 with 724,000 units, and that's where we saw the change in 2008 and 2009. We now export less, and we stagnated in a figure that ranges in the 5,000, and imports growing. Or this is how we said in the previous presentation. This is very connected with competitiveness, and we're going to focus on that in the next slide and say a bit how infrastructure and logistics impact that. The difficulty of the inbounding of materials and the outbound is making difficult the opportunities that we would have to be an exporting country and use our idle capacity to export. So what do we see? Look at how interesting this is. This study was carried out by the BID. If we had a reduction of the internal transportation of 1%, we would have an increase of up to 4% of exports, Brazilian exports in manufactured products. This is not just the automobile industry, but the manufacturing industry as a whole. The second point, this was by Fiesp, the efficiency that we have in the logistics infrastructure of the country represents 1% of the billing of the large companies. This is a waste. It's not that it's going out of one sector and going to the other. Nobody's making anything. It's like a waste. It's Brazil that's losing, and it's a very high figure if we look at it as a waste. We also see here that's what scares us the most. According to the data raising of the World Bank, from 2005 to 2012, the cost of exports increased by 45%. The exports price comparing 2005 to 2012 per container. I think this piece of data is interesting because it's not just talking about the automobile industry. When it's talking about container, we're talking about all segments. It tells us the difficulties that it is to compete with this export costs. We had a very interesting cost, $330 here, half of Argentina's, still above what China was offering, but below Korea and below India and Mexico. Coincidentally, if we look at the previous slide, 2005 was the year where we managed to export the most. This is obvious that there's a series of factors. Our aim here is not to discuss economy. There's a lot to be talked about, whether it's a commodity or freight, but also there is here an infrastructure issue, which will be seen in the next slides. If we see 2012, the leap that it had, we managed from a situation that was quite competitive. We could use the facilities as export platforms to a situation that's no longer feasible from the logistics standpoint. So we have to face this difficulty here. Also here, comparing 2005 and 2012, how much exports dropped and how much the freight increased. The indexes of our performance and logistics, Brazil in this very low position. And as to customs, we're talking about internal revenue, but we're talking about the customs process as a whole. We see a lot of evolution in the processes of the federal revenue and as to the technology that's been used, but it's not connected to the other intervening bodies in the process of import-export. So you end up by having several inspections when you could have only one. So discussions of having 24-hour ports and having one sole window for all activities of external, of foreign trade. We see that we are very low on that. Another piece of data, only the data that we showed here from 2012, comparing how much we are far away from other countries, and here the quality of our infrastructure, roads, railroads, and ports. If we compare with the developed country, this is the mark. It's much lower than the emerging countries. Comparing to China, we're really not doing well at all. So it's a shame, a country with the territorial dimensions, and we have difficulties to use our capacity, and we end up by using for commodities, and we don't use it for the manufacturing business. Some data from the paved roads. Brazil is really low. The total of our roads, only 6% of our roads are paved. It's really scary when we see these numbers. We used to be in these large centers and we think that everything is paved, but the reality is quite different. If we look into what's considered as paved, you would be scared as well, because many roads that are in the statistics as paved, these are roads that haven't been maintained for years. They barely have asphalt that make difficult all activities. Like a little bit of the transportation matrix, if we look at the whole, Brazil has a reasonable split of the transportation by road, but when we look down here, we still depend a lot on it. You have very little or nothing being used as waterways, and a lot on the road side. For our segment, we don't follow that split. This is what we used in the presentation of last year. This is when we had the chaos. In Santos, here we show the queue with loads, bulk loads. We didn't have this situation this year, but it's difficult to say it simply because of the actions that were taken, or it was more luck than wisdom, because we had a drop in the volume of shipping in this, especially in this critical period between March and May. So there was this competition didn't happen this year. Also, the ports, the new terminals of containers, both on the left and right margins, reduce the concentration on the one sole road that used to be here, and this also contributed to reduce the difficulties that we had that year. But looking from the bright side, some of the discussions that we had in our logistics commission together with the government, municipal, federal and state governments, we had some palliative solutions. to be, so we should have a regulatory yard, not just a segregation of bulk trucks, uh, to have all the trucks there to be received at the terminals. What was introduced this year, the scheduling of the trucks didn't used to be done, but now we do. But many times these trucks couldn't even get into the port because they weren't scheduled to be there. So then they had to go to another terminal with already scheduled, but they couldn't go through because of the amount of trucks that were in the area. So this is the kind of actions that have been happening, not as fast as we would like them to. Here we had a maximum of 12 hours for a truck to run for 20 kilometers. This is not for free. This didn't just happen. Those who are paying for all this are us, those who manufacture cars, those who transport cars, and those who use cars, because this is a waste. Part of this cost is related to the difficulties as far as infrastructure goes. So, talking a little bit about the Logistics Commission, it does this fortnight meetings where we try to connect, which is the theme of today's meeting. We try to connect the different matters, different infrastructure discussions, where we carry out studies and take it to the government and to other entities. And we also invite authorities, entities, representatives, logistics operators to our meetings so that we can find a solution. As I said, we always have to think about solutions at the short, medium, and long term, because with the lack of infrastructure that we have, it's no good just planning to build new roads. We have to have other solutions that are not the ideal ones. But if we don't think about short-term solutions, we will just halt. Then specific issues like the law of the ports, the simplification of the import-export processes, and other things that come up. So what's the challenge? Connecting with the first presentation, there is a challenge which is from the wall to the inside of the inbound to the, and how to make it how to supply the plants and distribute the final product in the most efficient and less burdened way. So with this idle capacity that we have today, with the difficulties in logistics, it's uncertain to make new investments. And from the wall outwards, how to increase exports with this adverse reality. So you have high logistics costs, much higher than in other countries. It's not that we're competing at 10-5%. We are usually competing at double as much, or double as expensive as they are. So we have a low quality in the infrastructure of transports and a lack of integration of the transportation modes. Last week I was participating in an event in Rio de Janeiro where a consulting from Holland was saying that the multimodality was was obsolete. We had to use 5 modalities. It's not the combination of the different modes, but leave that with the logistics provider. He will manage the issues about time and cost, and he will see what's the best combination. Brazil, we don't even have that effectively. We don't work with that, which is already obsolete in other countries, and this generates the lack of competitivity, which makes things even worse. So these are the causes that we have: the deficiency in access to the ports, the technological gap, the lack of regulating yards for load, and lack of silos in the producing poles of grains. And the effects are the bottleneck, the increase of the costs, operating costs, increase of the Brazil costs, and low competitive internationally, and low loss of market. to wrap up so that we are not so negative and not just talk about being victims, but being the main character. Here are the discussions that we have in the group and that we have been taken to the government and to other entities of what could be solutions of medium and short term and some long-term ones as well. So the pre-scheduling of loads, the sharing of infrastructure with other segments. When you have such a deficit infrastructure, it's no good to discuss solutions for one segment or the other. You have to discuss the logistics of the country as a whole. It's not wrong to export grains from Santos. The problem is not to see the best way of exporting these grains from Brazil. So the same thing as to the bidding of the terminals of vehicles and containers. We have to see what we will have in the future in terms of infrastructures compatible with what we have of installed capacity for exports. The same thing with the access to ports. It's no good to have space in the terminals when you have access difficulties. The regulating yards, one sole window, like I said before, we see very great progress in the automation of some processes in the federal revenue, internal revenue, but we have such difficulties to release the load in import and exporting. So we should reduce the time and we'll have more time for other materials to be exported or imported. The integration of the inspections, the imports and exports from Argentina, for example, you do one size, you stop, and it could all be done together. At the end of the day, you're in the same place and at the same frontier. And the extension of the use of vehicles, combined vehicles, along these last years, this increased by 45% the cost of road freight. So we have to think about solutions that can optimize the transportation. So it would be an advance that we should be seeking. And I would repeat what I already said about 10 times, which is thinking about short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gustavo, for sharing some of the bigger challenges that you face in South America and in Brazil, and the fantastic work that ANFAVEA are doing and trying to do to improve what's happening in the infrastructure, in particular, in developing the modes. And next up, to maybe hear of an idea of the future of the automotive industry and that most important person, the customer. I'd like to welcome to the stage Nick Beard, the Corporate Account Industry Director for Automotive for TNT. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Well, it's great to be down here again in Sao Paulo to see all of you. And today's presentation is about the customer, as Louis said, and some of the implications of tomorrow's customer as well, and the impact on customer service. So I was thinking about the best way to actually get this across to all of you. So I thought about a customer I knew very well. This little chap here was born in 1961. And during his lifetime, he has purchased 20 motor vehicles, because the car in the 70s and the 80s was incredibly important. It was the only way that this little chap could get freedom. It was the only way that this little chap could go out and visit people and see people. And the other thing, in the village he worked in, there were only 3 ladies of his age. So he had to get out to go off and visit people. So, and during his lifetime, he was buying cars that suited his purpose. 4-seaters, 7-seaters. And in his time, he has bought cars from pretty much all of the motor manufacturers, with the exception of the Aston Martin, which one day he may just be able to afford. So he has spent his lifetime purchasing cars, and he's fanatical about the automotive industry and the automotive world. And if I did a quick poll in this room in terms of ages, I can see most of you are probably born in the 70s. And the way that you feel about a car, the new generation of customer is going to be entirely different. And it's creeping up on us. So, the new generation. If you look at all the young people coming through now, they've got their freedom, they've got their mobile phone. The mobile phone and the internet has given these people all the connectivity that they want to. They can go and visit places on the web, they can connect with people, they can talk to people. So the car, how important is the car to these individuals? If we look at some of the global megatrends, that 2/3 of the world's population will be living in cities. Yes, the population is going to go up by another billion before 2030. But the trend is for people to move into megacities and only use things when they want to use them. If we look at our new customer for the future, the customer in the Western world, 20% of people under 24 are unemployed, which is a terrible figure. That wasn't the case when I was growing up. It was a lot lower. But today, all those young people are unemployed. So again, how important is the car going to be for them? And if they've been lucky enough to be educated and have a high quality of education, they've got debt. In the Western world, the average debt is $30,000 per student leaving higher education, university, with a degree. So if we think that 20% of them are unemployed, the remainder have a debt of $30,000, they've got to have somewhere to live. The car, which was very accessible for us and we needed it because we wanted the freedom, how important is the motor vehicle for the generations coming through behind us? So I've seen all the growth figures and they look very impressive and we're in for another couple of healthy years. But if you look further, if you look another decade out, how are people going to see the car, the new generation? In Brazil, you have a website called Zascar. It's a car ownership and sharing site. And the thing that struck me about this site in Brazil was the number of likes. 34 million people, and it's a Brazilian website, liked it. So everything about your population, and I think it's about 180 million now, 34 million people like the idea of actually sharing things, the sharing economy. And the sharing economy for the young people is definitely going to have a big impact on our business. They don't want to have a car sitting in the driveway. The car isn't going to be a status symbol for them. They're going to use cars to get them from A to B when they want it, and they only want to pay from A to B. They don't want it there for 365 days. Whereas in our generations, we like to have a nice car. It's either a status symbol or we actually need it for transportation means. But the new customer, are they going to feel the same way? If we look at England, we have a website called blablabla.com. And it takes the ownership model another step further, it's the sharing economy. So the sharing economy there is very interesting because you sign up to blah, blah, blah as a driver, and then you advertise your seats in your car. So you're going from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro, you're going on Monday, you're leaving at 9 o'clock, and you have 3 seats in your car. So you say, I want 200 reais for each seat. And people say, yes, I want to come in your car. And you get graded and scored, and you move up the ranking, so you become an ambassador, the highest level. They can see a picture of your car on the internet. They know what you look like. They know the type of person you are. And it's like Airbnb. Who's used Airbnb in their travels? Very, very simplistic, the sharing economy. You know exactly who you're going to see, where you're going to stay, what it's going to cost you. And the car And the way people want to use the car now, you can see that coming, and it's coming quicker. When I saw the numbers on these websites, I thought, 1.5 million, 34 million people want to get attracted and into this. But if you think about, I haven't got a job, I've got $30,000 worth of debt, I can't afford a car, I need somewhere to live, but I have my mobile phone so I can connect with everybody. Why don't we have more of this? And if I was a young person, I'd certainly be thinking that way. The other thing these young people do is on the service side, and we all know it, you know, we've all got dealerships out there. If we provide exceptional service, you know, the likes come in. If we provide bad service, you know, the part isn't there on time, the dealer has upset us, within an hour of leaving that dealership, the young customer is walking out of the dealership on the smartphone going, dislike, dislike, it's rubbish, it's rubbish, it's rubbish, it's rubbish. Within 1 hour. And then you have this social media storm, which is about to go viral because you've really upset them with your brand and your product. So the young people, in my experience, they have absolutely no loyalty. You know, they will destroy you using social media in minutes. So if you think about all the things we're trying to do in our industry, dealer satisfaction, delivery on time in perfect condition, yeah? It's becoming harder and harder and harder. And every time we make a mistake, the whole world knows about it. You know, everybody's on the internet telling him T&T didn't deliver, they smashed my parcel to pieces, and it goes on and on and on. You know, the car dealership told me that it was fixed. I went down the road and the wheel came off. And it goes on and on and on. So our job in logistics and in the automotive industry, you know, I think we've got to start planning some 20 years in advance, or even quicker for some of these trends which we can see coming towards us. So what's the industry done about it to sort of try and bring people back into the brands, you know, create that loyalty? The extended warranties. You know, we saw some people from Asia came across, and the first thing they did was 7-year warranty. And other brands had to follow suit because the customer wants certainty. All of us want to know how much the car costs, what does the service cost, if it breaks down, you're going to fix it, and are the parts going to be delivered on time when I want to go and get my car fixed. So the extended warranty is probably here to stay. I can't see anything else changing. The finance deals which companies give you now. Mr. Beard, buy this car, you've got certainty, we've got the extended warranty, and to make it even easier for you, we're going to chuck in fixed price servicing. Now, so far it sounds fantastic. So I've got a car which I know exactly how much it's going to cost me each month. It's covered for 7 years. I've got fixed price servicing. All that needs to happen now is for the logistics companies and the parts companies to deliver the promise which the marketing side of the business have actually made. So if we get the warranty and we get the price, it's definitely a like. You know, that is definitely something which we know that today's customers actually want. But one of the things which is a challenge, and more so in Brazil, is we have got some horrible challenges, which we've heard my colleagues this morning talking about. Infrastructure. You know, we've got one choice, it's by road. Inflation. Inflation's growing at 6%. And growth is scheduled to be, I think it was 1% was the figure mentioned. So poor infrastructure, high inflation, low growth, and on the marketing side of the business, it's becoming more challenging. The marketeers have already promised today's customers fixed pricing, warranties, service parts delivered on time. And they've fixed those now. So we're in an environment where we've actually got to rapidly work together and change the way that we actually service the end customer from a logistics viewpoint. And that's a real challenge in Brazil. I mean, I see so many times across the world, as soon as we're in this predicament, everybody says, right, it's cost down. And what happens when we know we're in a cost down period is we get RFQs coming out to the service providers saying, look, we need a target 5% reduction, we need a 10% reduction. But we never actually change the way, together, we approach the market. We don't put the problem there and say, well, why don't we actually develop a new solution? It could be a slower solution, it may be a faster solution, it may be that we take those parts and put them at the point of use. We take them further up into the country, we put them in the regions. So we never take a longer term. And again, you heard the medium solution, the longer term, and the short-term solutions. And in Brazil, that's becoming harder and harder to do. You can, yes, sure, you can cut cost. But if you cut too much cost, we know what's going to happen. Because we're going to go back to this, and our customers on social media, particularly the new ones, are going to crucify us. So, together, we need to connect and see how we can actually sit down, put the problems there, and look at the ways that we can share the problem between the industries, particularly in Brazil. You've seen great examples of sharing economies, but as providers, we never think about sharing with others. It's always, right, this is my solution, I'm going to keep it. But you do have some unique geographic issues in Brazil as well. So I think on closing, this is what's happening in the logistics world, because you've had the marketeers promising the customer everything, and at the other end, you've got the logistics companies, you've got the logistics directors in the middle saying, guys, we've got to get the cost down. Let's go and squeeze those logistics guys again. But I would suggest that we take another approach and we spend time working together, putting the issue on the table. And within Brazil, have workshops with multiple providers. You've got a shared issue here, which is only going to get worse over the next 3 to 5 years. And then in 10 years' time, with all those guys and girls that are 24, they're going to be up there demanding even more from us, but in a totally different way. So let's get the infrastructure issues right, but in the meantime, we're going to have to work around those as a team. So don't let the logistics cost down be squeezed too much, because if you do, your service to the end customer, who, let's face it, the end customer pays all of our bills, they'll suffer. And they will not forgive you for it as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my short presentation for you. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. A very interesting presentation. Thinking about the customer and the customer of the future. It seems to me that too often we're trying to fix the problems. I was going to say the problems of today. We're probably still trying to fix the problems of yesterday. But maybe we should, have a bigger look forward at what the industry is going to look like, the impact on logistics, and what we can do to prepare for that. Now it's time for your part, for questions, comments from the audience. If you do have any questions or comments, please raise your hand. Wait for the microphone to come to you. So you can ask the questions in Portuguese or English, but that's why you need to wait for the microphone so we can get the translation. Also, please say your name and your company name. So there isn't, that much time left. So I'll throw it straight out first if there's anyone who wants to ask a question to kick off. No? All right, the question for me, perhaps for Gustavo, but maybe even for others, is there has been a lot of investment in Brazil and will continue to be, hopefully, a little bit over the next couple of years because of the sports events, the World Cup this year, and I think we should gloss over that very quickly, and the Olympics coming up. Was the investments that were made useful for logistics? Were the investments too much passenger, or you might call retail-led in a way, or was there a big benefit for commercial, for the industry? Yeah. Gustavo.
Well, I would say that, unfortunately, most of the investments were more for the passengers. And even though there was some investments that, of course, it will also improve the infrastructure in the airports, especially, they were too little compared to what we need when we're talking about the industry. If we take the last decade, it was around 1% of the GPD that was invested in infrastructure. So that's too little. So unfortunately, I think it is needed more efforts to really solve the investments and not look only for airports and things like that, but also to look into the rail, to the multimodal transportation and things like that. So that's yeah.
Okay. Okay, it looks like you're a quiet bunch today. Just again, a question from my side, or perhaps even a comment. We looked at the infrastructure development that's been made in, or comparing Brazil to other regions, and I looked at the World Economic Forum. They've got a chart on the availability and quality of transport and infrastructure. And Brazil came in at 102. Countries that were above them, okay, just above them perhaps, but were Malawi, Zambia, Rwanda, Armenia, Macedonia, and Guatemala, had better logistics infrastructure. The good news, you were ahead of Nicaragua and Ivory Coast. So you got to look at the positive a bit. But again, going back to that investment, and perhaps again for ANFAVEA, one of the reasons for the conference initially, before I started the conference, I was asking, why should I do a conference in Brazil? And people were talking about their infrastructure, and I said, okay, I organize the conferences, and I'm the biggest fan of our conferences, but I'm not sure that doing a conference in Brazil will help the infrastructure. I'm not sure the government will say, wow, Louis done a conference in Brazil, we better start building rail and roads and things. But one of the reasons for the conference was you wanted to get together and have a kind of lobbying group. So again, back to Gustavo, I'm afraid, is how has, I've seen the steps that you're making. Are you getting the full support from the industry? Are the people in the room giving you the full support? Are the logistics companies giving you the full support? The car makers at the higher levels, the presidents of Ford and General Motors and Fiat in Brazil, are they giving you the full support and understand the challenges that you're facing? Because ANFAVEA previously, before your organization, didn't seem particularly interested in logistics. Are you managing to really push that more strongly at the highest levels now through ANFAVEA?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, even though when we see the figures and when we make the presentation and we see all the negative figures, I would say that recently we see that at least the government is listening to what is being said and it is discussing this. So, for instance, last year we discussed it and we created a panel with other segments as well to discuss and to really put some proposal how to solve the infrastructure problem in Brazil. And the result of these discussions was a document that is being given to the government actually this week with all the suggestions from different sectors. And I think there is a trend that there will be improvements in that. So Even when we mentioned the difficulties that we had last year with Santos Port, I think some of the initiatives to solve at least short-term and mid-term was taken into consideration based on the studies that we made. But I would say that it's like this. There is a trend for the thing to be solved, but unfortunately it's not in the speed that we want that to be solved. So what we have to do now is really to align our wishes and our demands. And we should stop, actually. We need to do our part, not being victims of this, and try to be the protagonists. Trying to really not only push, but giving the solution already ready for them to implement. And I would say I'm very positive to that. Even with all the difficulties, all the numbers we have, I think that we are in a moment now not to give up, but on the other hand, to even put more energy and more pressure to have this solved. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you, Gustavo. And I think it is excellent that the work that you're doing at ANFAVEA. So a question firstly in the middle here, and then we'll go there. Okay.
Bom dia a todos, meu nome é Eduardo Catar.
Good morning, I am Eduardo Capar, KPH. Congratulations to the three presenters, to the three speakers. Excellent your statements. Gustavo, the situation we have in the country, we are all concerned about export, imports, and movement of containers, parts, etc. We have productive capacity today, but we are limited today. A factor that is a big impairment is the distribution of parts and loads that are palletized. So the use of equipment today works together with cargo tech we are introducing in Brazil. The concept of the stackers coupled to the forklifts coupled to trucks, and there is a difficulty to align financing close to FINAME, BNDES, that should be the same given to trucks today, so that it could be a complete logistics. At the same time, be aware of how equipment, the convertible by Paulo, will bring a fantastic solution as to take vehicles and with the same equipment we return with containers. And at the same time, we may use this formula to palletize loads or cargo. This we have to work together with ABIMAC and ANFAVEA so that we provide the carriers, the logistic carriers, the condition of have a unique financing to this joint equipment, not impairing this separate acquisition. This makes unviable this logistics. This I had to comment, and thank you.
Sem dúvida.
Undoubtedly, this was my comment about being the protagonist here and to find the solutions that integrate the several branches of industry. We shouldn't be limited to have to one or other solution. This was material that was created, the logistic panel. They take into consideration the different segments. In the presentation, I mentioned that we have exports of grains in Santos. There's nothing wrong with this. The issue is it the best place to export grains? Thinking about the industry, is it the cheapest way? We have to think about connection, reuse of trips. The gain in logistics today is the reverse logistics. It's to reuse the operation to bring a container. We do this in our company. Instead of returning the container empty, you return it full. It seems simple, but within the market, it's not used completely. And when we see that besides doing this in the company, we can do this with other different companies, we potentialize this. We reduce costs, the lead time, and we are more competitive. These initiatives to discuss several associations, several companies, and the theme we have here, connection, making connection. What you said is to really make this connection connecting the different solutions and equipment so that we can solve at a short, medium, and long-term basis.
Fábio Castello.
Fábio Castello, from Scania. A minha pergunta é para o Nick. A sua proposta aqui de dividir experiências e inovações entre os PPLs. Temos algumas iniciativas também na Scania desta maneira. Gostaria de ouvir
Behind it, who should push for that? Who should be behind? Who should be the sponsor for such kind of initiative? Should be the makers, the 3PL. How can we start this kind of cooperation?
Well, I think that the association ANFAVEA could actually facilitate that. You could have round tables where you pick a subject which is of concern to everybody, but within those round table environments there's got to be complete trust and understanding between the people. And if you go into those forums with open minds, I think it can work very well. We did one a couple of years ago down in Brazil where we had multiple OEMs, and to start with, in the first hour, everybody was very sort of, I'm not going to talk to you, and etc. But it was run on a methodology of a lean methodology workshop, and everybody became involved. And when we started to run through it, everybody said, "Well, hang about, that's exactly the same issue that I have." And we worked through that for a whole day, had a dinner at the end, and it worked very well, and everybody benefited from it. But it was confidential with everybody in that room. So it can be achieved.
Olá, bom dia, meu nome é Alexandre
Good
Godoy.
morning, I am Alexandro Godoy, I'm from Interglobes. My question to Gustavo, based on the figures you showed, and Ricardo also showed, of growth in production in Brazil versus the perspective of sales that are decreasing to the following years, and having so many other players, new players, coming into the market, if we stop to think, we don't have a position here. We have two possibilities. Either Brazil prepares to be an export platform, or we'll have a stagnation and crisis in some years that will close some plants, and a very deep crisis in the automotive area. In the ANFAVEA position, how the carriers, how the car industry will position in the years ahead? I can answer this on the part of ANFAVEA, but for any segment, to be dependent only in the Brazil market, it's very dangerous to any segment. We have ups and downs in our country, in production, in volume. To depend on Latin America is no good. So to have the opportunity of export, the excess of production to be an export platform is a good strategy, because you do not depend only on one region. You may count on a growth that may exist in others or other continents or markets that are affected by a world crisis. If this happens, this is the way, it's to work with export. You see that in the figures that were shown, we have a reasonable amount, even a percentage in the 2005-6. This has dropped. Specifically talking about Scania, we exported 70% of our production in 2007, when I thought export market, and without counting Latin America, because due to a local area, we consider this local market to export to Africa, Asia, Europe, helping the production units there, because not only to the automotive segment, but to any segment, it's like an insurance you make to have your part of your production dedicated to export and compete globally. I think responding to this steadiness, we have to balance this with exports and the ups and downs in the Brazilian market. This is the history we have. Obrigado.
No? Okay, well, I think we've gone over time anyway. So thank you very much to the panel for their interesting presentations and the answers to the questions. Thank you. I think it was an interesting start to give us a good overview of what is happening in South America and also that perspective of how the automotive industry is going to change. I hope we can continue along some of those themes. Supply chain, looking at complete supply chains coming up next, then multimodal, which we know is always a very important issue, and the last session, session 4, will be a group discussion with some of the VIPs who are here. But otherwise, please join us for our coffee break hosted by Jeffco. Thank you very much.